You have a headache, then chills. Then a swelling appears under your arm, dark, hard as a stone, burning hot to the touch. Within 3 days, you are dead, and so is everyone who touched you. For centuries, the plague was a 14th century story. The Black Death. Rats, fleas, half of Europe gone. But in 2022, a team of geneticists published a paper in the journal Nature that shattered that timeline into pieces. The plague didn't begin in the Middle Ages. It began 5,000 years earlier, and the evidence had been hiding inside human bones the entire time, waiting for someone with the right tools to read it. Here is what they found, and why it changes everything you thought you knew about civilization. In 2015, a team led by evolutionary geneticist Eske Willerslev at the University of Copenhagen extracted DNA from a 5,000-year-old skeleton discovered in Latvia. The man had been a hunter-gatherer. He was somewhere between 20 and 30 years old when he died, and buried deep inside his teeth in the dental pulp, where blood vessels sit close to the enamel, the team found the genetic fingerprint of Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium. 5,000 years old, the oldest strain ever recovered from a human body. This was not the same version that would later devastate medieval Europe. This early form was likely less efficient at spreading, perhaps missing key genetic mutations that would evolve over the following millennia. But it was unmistakably the same family of bacteria. The same killer, just an earlier draft. Scientists call this kind of analysis paleogenomics, the reading of ancient DNA to reconstruct diseases that existed thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down. And what paleogenomics revealed next changed the scale of the story entirely. Frederick Searsham and a large international team analyzed over 500 ancient human genomes collected from across Eurasia, spanning a period of 4,000 years, from the Neolithic farming era through the Bronze Age, stretching from Siberia to Scandinavia. The findings, published in Nature in 2022, were staggering in their implications. Early plague was not an occasional outbreak, it was everywhere. The researchers found traces of Yersinia pestis DNA in roughly 1 out of every 10 individuals sampled from certain time periods and regions. 1 in 10. Let that number settle in your mind. In a world without antibiotics, without hospitals, without even the basic concept that invisible organisms could kill you, entire communities were living alongside a bacterium that could extinguish them in days, and they had no idea what was happening. The medieval Black Death, by comparison, killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people across Eurasia between 1347 and 1353. That was devastating enough to reshape European society for centuries: labor shortages, economic upheaval, the collapse of the feudal system. But the ancient plague the Searsham study uncovered operated on an even more fundamental level. It didn't just disrupt society, it erased entire populations from the map. And the timing of these ancient plague waves lines up precisely with one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in European archaeology. Around 5,500 years ago, the Cucuteni-Tripilia culture thrived in what is now Romania, Ukraine, and Moldova. These were not primitive scattered camps. Archaeological excavations reveal settlements of up to 15,000 people, some of the largest concentrations of human beings anywhere on Earth at the time. They built 2-story houses, crafted intricate pottery decorated with spiraling geometric patterns, and maintained trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. For over 2,000 years, this civilization flourished. Then around 3,500 BCE, it all came apart. Settlements were burned or abandoned, population plummeted, the elaborate pottery stopped being made, the houses fell into disrepair. For decades, archaeologists argued over the cause: climate change, warfare, soil exhaustion from farming the same land too long. The Searsham study raises a haunting alternative explanation: plague. Widespread, devastating, recurring plague that hollowed out entire communities from the inside, leaving behind ghost towns that no one ever came back to rebuild. Because what happened next didn't just change one culture, it reshaped the genetic map of an entire continent. Around 3000 BCE, a group of people called the Yamnaya began migrating out of the Pontic steppe, the vast grasslands stretching across what is now southern Ukraine and Russia. They were pastoralists. They herded cattle and sheep. They had domesticated horses, and they moved westward into Europe in numbers that modern ancient DNA analysis has made impossible to ignore. Genetic studies show that within just a few centuries, Yamnaya-related ancestry replaced roughly 90% of the existing genetic population in parts of northern Europe. 90%. That is not cultural exchange. That is near total population replacement. The hypothesis now supported by the plague evidence is chilling in its simplicity. The Yamnaya didn't necessarily conquer Europe through superior weapons or military tactics. They walked into a continent that had already been gutted by disease. The farming communities that had built the Cucuteni-Tripilia settlements, that had cultivated the river valleys for millennia, they were already dying. The plague had already done the worst of the work. The Yamnaya simply moved into the emptied landscape and filled the silence. Think about what that means for a moment. The genetic ancestry you carry in your cells right now, the deep population structure of Europe and much of Western Asia, may have been shaped not by who was strongest or most technologically advanced, but by who managed to survive a bacterial apocalypse that lasted for over 1,000 years. But how did this ancient plague actually kill? That question is still being debated, and the answer is more disturbing than you might expect. The medieval version of Yersinia pestis, the Black Death strain, spread primarily through fleas living on rats. A flea bites an infected rodent, then bites a human, introducing the bacteria into the bloodstream. Those bacteria travel to the lymph nodes, which swell into painful lumps called buboes, hard, dark masses, sometimes the size of an apple. Hence the name, bubonic plague. Johannes Kraus and Kirsten Bowes at the Max Planck Institute confirmed this mechanism in 2011, when they successfully extracted and sequenced Yersinia pestis DNA from Black Death skeletons buried in a London cemetery. But the earliest plague strains appear to have lacked some of the key genetic mutations that make flea-borne transmission efficient. This has led researchers to propose that the first plague may have spread more like a respiratory illness. Through coughing, through breathing the same air as someone who was infected, through the fine droplets that pass between people standing close together in a confined space. Pneumonic plague. If that is how the Neolithic plague moved, it would explain the sheer scale of devastation. Imagine a farming settlement of several hundred people. Houses built close together, walls shared, families sleeping in the same room. One person develops a headache and a cough. By the next morning, there is blood when they cough. 3 days later, they are gone. A week after that, the village is silent. There are no antibiotics. There is no germ theory. There is no concept of quarantine. There is only the incomprehensible experience of watching everyone you know waste away in front of you, one by one, without understanding why. No one in that settlement had the framework to comprehend what was happening. They could not see the bacteria. They could not trace the transmission. They only knew that people around them were dying, and that nothing they tried, no herb, no ritual, no prayer, made any difference. And then the fields go untended. The livestock wander off. Grass grows over the footpaths. Rain washes away the hearth ash. Within a generation, there is almost nothing left to indicate that hundreds of people once lived, loved, and worked in that place. This pattern, plague, collapse, migration, replacement, may have repeated itself across Europe in devastating cycles for over 1,000 years. The Searsham research team found that the plague bacterium itself was evolving during this period, mutating and adapting, becoming more or less lethal in waves that correlated with shifts in human population density. Each outbreak struck a community that had partially recovered from the last one. It was not a single catastrophe. It was a slow, generational grinding down of entire civilizations, a 1,000-year attrition that no one survived long enough to document. Now here is the part of the story that flips everything you just heard on its head. The plague may have accidentally built the modern world. The mass migrations it triggered didn't just erase populations. They merged technologies, languages, and ideas that had been developing independently for thousands of years. The Yamnaya brought metallurgy, wheeled vehicles, and horseback riding into Europe. They brought new burial customs, new social structures, new ways of organizing labor. And critically, they brought their language. The Indo-European language family, spoken today by nearly half of the world's total population. From English to Hindi to Spanish to Russian to Persian, likely spread across Eurasia through these same migration waves. Some linguists and geneticists now argue that without the population vacuum created by ancient plague, the Yamnaya migration might never have achieved this scale, and the Indo-European languages might never have become dominant. The cultural and linguistic map of the modern world might look entirely different. Your ability to understand these words, spoken in a language descended from that ancient migration, may trace an indirect line back to a bacterial pandemic that began 5,000 years ago. And this is where the story stops being about the ancient past, because your body is still fighting this war. The human immune system carries evolutionary scars from every plague it has ever survived. Specific gene variants that today protect against modern infections like HIV and tuberculosis appear to have been positively selected during exactly the time period when ancient plague was sweeping across Eurasia. The MHC complex, the set of genes your immune system uses to identify and respond to foreign invaders, is one of the most diverse and rapidly evolving regions in your entire genome. Scientists believe this extraordinary diversity exists precisely because of the relentless selective pressure exerted by pathogens like Yersinia pestis over thousands of years. Your immune system is not a generic shield. It is a fossil record written in proteins and genes. Every quirk in how your body reacts to an infection, every variation in your fever response, every odd susceptibility or unexpected resistance, these are traces left by a battle one of your ancestors fought thousands of years ago, and won. The plague did not just kill, it sculpted. It carved the genetic landscape of entire continents. It determined who lived, who died, who migrated, who stayed behind, and what language their grandchildren would speak. It shaped the very immune system reading these words right now. You carry the evidence in every cell of your body, every single day. Passed down through 5,000 years of birth and survival and birth again. An unbroken chain of people who were just strong enough, just lucky enough, just resistant enough to survive what killed everyone around them. You just never knew it was a plague.